They told her the job was simple. Care for one child, keep to herself, never ask about the father's work. The salary was more than she'd earned in 2 years of nursing shifts at St. Paul's. The non-disclosure agreement was 43 pages long. But Simone Adler was 3 months behind on her brother's medication costs, and 43 pages felt like a small price for the ability to breathe again. She didn't know she was walking into Luciano Ferrante's world. She didn't know that his so-called business interests stretched across the Vancouver waterfront like a cold, invisible tide. And she certainly didn't know that 6 weeks from that Wednesday afternoon she would be bleeding on the imported marble floor of a Gastown gallery, throwing herself between a hired blade and a 7-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a single word since the night his mother died. This is the story of how a broke, exhausted nurse from East Van brought a crime lord to his knees. The interview didn't happen in an office. It happened in a booth at the back of a private dining club on Alberni Street. The kind of place that doesn't have a sign, only a number on the door, and a man at the entrance who looks at your face before he looks at your ID. Simone sat across from a trim, silver-haired lawyer named Mr. Renault, who reviewed her resume the way someone might review a lease agreement, methodically and without sentiment. Registered nurse, 3 years at St. Paul's, he turned a page. You resigned in February. I was let go, Simone said. Budget restructuring. Your brother? Cystic fibrosis, moderate to severe, ongoing treatment costs. Yes. Mr. Renault closed the folder. The remuneration for this position is $9,000 per month, deposited directly, plus full use of the guest suite and a vehicle. Your only expense will be whatever you choose to spend on yourself personally. Simone's throat tightened. 9,000. That was Thomas's quarterly medication. That was the back rent. That was air. What exactly would I be doing? Caring for Oscar. He is 7 years old. He does not speak, not since his mother passed away 18 months ago. He has seen 4 specialists and 3 full-time caregivers. None of them lasted longer than 8 weeks. Mr. Renault slid the NDA across the white tablecloth. What we require is simple: discretion, loyalty, and an understanding that Mr. Ferrante's household operates with a level of privacy that is non-negotiable. You will not discuss the family. You will not invite guests to the property. You will not contact anyone in media or law enforcement regarding what you may observe. He didn't say, or else he didn't need to. Simone looked at the gold pen waiting beside the document. She thought of Thomas in the hospital bed last month, his chest rattling like a tin can in the wind. She thought of the stack of bills wedged under her kitchen cutting board because she couldn't look at them straight. She picked up the pen. The Ferrante estate sat behind iron gates in West Vancouver, above the tree line, overlooking the strait. It was the kind of property that didn't appear on any real estate listing, not because it wasn't worth anything, but because it had never needed to be sold. The guards at the gate wore civilian clothes. Their posture said something else entirely. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pacini, showed Simone to her room with the warmth of someone delivering a weather report. East wing is yours, she said. West wing belongs to Mr. Ferrante, his office, his rooms. You don't go there unless invited, and you won't be invited. When do I meet him? Simone asked. Mrs. Pacini gave her a look that was almost sympathetic. If you're fortunate, not often. Oscar was in the sunroom. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by sheets of drawing paper, a box of charcoal sticks open beside him. He didn't look up when Simone walked in. He was drawing something. A wolf, she realized, rendered with surprising precision for a 7-year-old. The lines were confident. The wolf's eyes were careful. I'm Simone, she said. She didn't crouch down, didn't perform cheerfulness. She just sat on the floor beside him, at a distance that wasn't threatening. Oscar didn't acknowledge her. She looked at the wolf. He's watching something, she said quietly. His ears are forward. He's not angry. He's paying attention. A very long pause. Oscar pushed a blank sheet of paper toward her without looking up. He set a charcoal stick on top of it. Simone picked up the charcoal. She drew badly, she knew it, but she drew a tree beside the wolf, giving him something to watch. Oscar stared at it for a moment. Then he reached over and added 2 birds to the branches. They were better than her tree by a considerable margin. She didn't mention it, she just smiled at the page. By the time Mrs. Pacini called them for supper, the floor was covered in their paper. She met Luciano Ferrante at 2 in the morning. She hadn't been able to sleep. Thomas's next treatment window was approaching, and her phone kept buzzing with automated pharmacy reminders. So she went downstairs to the kitchen for tea. She was filling the kettle when she heard the back door open. She smelled copper before she saw the blood. 3 men came through the door, supporting a 4th between them. The fourth was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair and a jaw like something carved from the Rockies. His white dress shirt was soaked through on the right side, dark and wet. One of the men saw Simone first. 4 hands went to 4 jackets. "Stop." The tall man's voice was low and utterly controlled, even through the pain. He pushed his own men aside and crossed the kitchen toward her, pressing one hand against his ribs. Up close, his eyes were a strange amber brown like whiskey held up to a lamp. They were not kind eyes, but they were awake, sharply, terrifyingly awake. "You're the nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Can you pack a wound?" She'd packed worse in Emerge, yes. "Then do it." He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, removing his hand from his side. She worked quickly, cleanly. He didn't make a sound the whole time, just watched her face with that amber gaze, measuring something she couldn't name. When she finished, he spoke again. "You didn't see this." "I know. I don't mean as a courtesy, Miss Adler. I mean as a fact. You treated a man who injured himself on a fence post. There were no other men here. There was no blood." His voice was the kind that didn't leave room for negotiation. Not because it was loud, because it simply occupied all available space in the room. "Understood," Simone said. "Good." He stood, slowly, carefully. Then he paused. "The boy, is he sleeping?" "He was when I came down." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Something older than a smile. "Thank you," he said, and walked out of the kitchen like a man who had never been injured at all. She learned quickly what the Ferrante name meant in Vancouver. She was not naive. She had grown up in East Van, in a neighborhood where you understood certain things without anyone explaining them. The guards weren't security staff. The late-night phone calls weren't business calls. The men who came and went through the estate's side entrance weren't colleagues. She focused on Oscar. That felt like the only ground she could stand on. 4 weeks in, she was with him in the garden, reading aloud from a field guide on Pacific birds, while he sketched the crows on the fence. When she heard it, a slow vehicle on the private road, moving with the particular crawl of something looking, not arriving. Simone's body knew before her brain finished the thought. She'd grown up hearing that sound. "Oscar." She kept her voice calm. "We're going inside now." He looked at her. "Now, please." She stood, holding out her hand. He took it without hesitation. She didn't know why that hit her as hard as it did, and they walked quickly toward the back entrance. She felt the attention from the tree line. She moved faster. They were inside, and the door was locked when Luciano came around the corner from his office, a pistol already in his hand, scanning the grounds. The low-moving vehicle. No plates I could read. He looked at her. He looked at Oscar, who was pressed against her side, one hand still in hers. Then he looked at the road, where the vehicle was already gone. "That was a probe," he said, lowering the weapon. His eyes returned to her. "How did you know?" "I grew up off Commercial Drive," she said. "You learn what a car looks like when it's counting something." Luciano was quiet for a moment. Then he looked down at Oscar. The boy was staring up at his father with an expression Simone had come to recognize. Pure, concentrated longing, the way a solar panel turns toward a window even when there's only grey light coming through. "Dinner," Luciano said abruptly, "tonight, all of us." Oscar drew a picture of the 3 of them at the table that night. Simone and Luciano and Oscar. Small figures, square table, the 3 of them taking up equal space on the page. He slid it across to his father at the end of the meal. Luciano looked at it for a long time. "The colors are good," he said finally. Oscar stared at him with enormous waiting eyes. "They're very good," Luciano said again, quieter, and he folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket, over his heart. Oscar didn't smile. He never smiled, but his shoulders came down about 1/2 an inch, and Simone had to look away before her throat did something embarrassing. Later, walking to her room, she was stopped in the corridor by Stefan Muro. Stefan was Luciano's second-in-command, smooth in a way that felt rehearsed, handsome in a way that felt like a tool. He smiled at her with all his teeth. "You're settling in," he said. "I'm doing my job." "You're doing more than that." His smile didn't move. "You've got Luciano eating dinner. You've got him folding children's drawings. That's not the job, is it?" "It is, actually," Simone said. "Just be careful." Stefan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, entirely relaxed. Men like him don't change because someone sat on the floor with his kid. They get distracted, and when the boss is distracted, people get hurt. His eyes held hers, sometimes people in his orbit. He walked away. She stood in the hallway for a long time afterward. She thought about what he'd said. She thought about the way he'd said it, not as a warning, as information being transferred. The Gastown Children's Art Foundation held a spring showcase every year in a converted heritage building on Water Street. Oscar had submitted 3 pieces in January, before Simone arrived, and the invitation had been sitting on Mrs. Pacini's desk for weeks. It was Simone who noticed the date was approaching. It was Simone who put it on Luciano's calendar with a note. Oscar submitted these. He doesn't know if you know. Luciano showed up the morning of the event wearing a dark suit. He stood in the kitchen and drank his espresso and didn't speak. Simone got Oscar into his good clothes. Navy chinos, the sweater he liked, and when they came downstairs, Oscar stopped dead at the sight of his father waiting in the foyer. He looked at Simone. She gave him a tiny nod. Oscar walked over and stood beside his father, looking up at him. Luciano put a hand on his son's shoulder, carefully, like touching something he was afraid to break, and didn't say anything and didn't need to. The gallery was warm and crowded with families. Oscar's pieces were on the east wall, a raven in charcoal, the wolf from his first day with Simone, and a third piece she hadn't seen, a woman sitting on a floor surrounded by paper drawn from behind, her face turned away. She recognized her own hair, her own posture, her breath caught. She didn't say anything about it. She stood with Luciano and watched Oscar move through the room, stopping in front of his own work with the considered expression of someone assessing whether the world had understood. She almost didn't see the man near the service corridor. He was dressed like catering staff, moving too deliberately, his eyes going to Oscar and not to the art. Her voice was low and very steady. Don't turn, service door, left. He went still. How many? One I can see. Oscar was 6 feet away. The main exit was behind them. The crowd was thick. Get him out. I know. She crossed the room casually and crouched beside Oscar, pretending to look at the wolf drawing. Hey, she murmured. We're going to step outside for a bit. Just us. Oscar looked at her. Come on. She took his hand. She was 5 feet from the side exit when the man moved. She didn't think about it. Later, she would try to reconstruct the decision and find that there wasn't one. There was only the sight of the blade and Oscar's small hand in hers and her body doing what her body did. She stepped in front of him. The knife caught her across the left side, below the ribs. She felt the impact before the pain, a dull, enormous shove, and she wrapped both arms around Oscar and turned her back, putting herself between him and whatever came next. She heard shouting. She heard Luciano's voice, very loud in a language she didn't speak. She heard running. And then she was on the floor and Oscar was still in her arms. And she was thinking quite clearly that she needed to stay upright and that she was not managing to do that. Simone. Luciano was there, his hands on her face, his voice stripped of everything except what was underneath. Look at me. Oscar, she said. He's here, he's right here, look at me. She did. His amber eyes were very close. She thought that she'd never noticed the gold in them before, and that seemed like a strange thing to be thinking about. Then she didn't think anything for a while. The private clinic was in a converted heritage property in Yaletown. Luciano paced the corridor for 2 hours without sitting down. When the surgeon came out and told him that the knife had missed her kidney by less than a centimeter, that she had lost significant blood but was stable, Luciano put his hand flat on the wall and stood that way for a long time. Stefan found him there. We need to talk about the leak, Stefan said. The event wasn't on any public calendar. Whoever sent that man knew exactly where Oscar would be. Yes, he said. They did. He didn't say anything else. Stefan, to his credit, had the sense to look slightly uncertain. Luciano drove to the Jow Syndicate's operations warehouse in Richmond with 4 men. He left 2 of them outside. He went in. The conversation with the underboss was brief. The man handed over a burner phone without being asked twice. The last message in the thread read, Target will be at the Watersent Gallery, 7 p.m. The nurse is the soft point. Make sure she doesn't walk out. Luciano read the number the message had come from. He read it twice. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just thought about Oscar standing in the gallery, looking at his own drawings like they meant something. He thought about Simone, stepping in front of his son, with the absolute, unconsidered certainty of someone who has already decided what they're willing to lose. He thought about Stefan. I need to get back to the clinic, he said. He was back in under 40 minutes. He dismissed the guard outside room 7 and turned the corridor cameras off at the box on the wall. He went into the room and sat in the chair beside Simone's bed and waited. At 11:30, the elevator at the end of the corridor opened. Stefan walked in carrying flowers. He was wearing a grey suit and the expression of a man paying a respectful visit. He closed the door and locked it. He set the flowers down without looking at them. He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Simone's face with something that was almost regret. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small capped syringe. "Nothing personal," Stefan said quietly. "You're just in the way of what comes next." "And what," Luciano said from the corner, "comes next?" Stefan turned. Luciano stepped out of the shadow beside the window. He looked entirely calm. He looked the way a lake looks before something large moves underneath it. Stefan's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds: surprise, calculation, recovery, aggression. He stepped back toward the door. "Dom, listen. She's a liability. You know that. The moment you start making decisions based on what some woman thinks of you." She stepped in front of my son. Luciano walked toward him. She put her body between Oscar and a blade. "And you sent that man." "I did it for the organization." "You did it for yourself." Luciano stopped directly in front of him. "You want the territory. You made a deal with the Joe family. The woman in that bed was going to help you sell me the story, that this was a random attack, that I should refocus, get my head back in the game." He tilted his head slightly. "How long?" Stefan grabbed for the door. Luciano caught his wrist. What happened next was very quiet and very thorough. When it was done, Stefan was on the floor, waiting for the men Luciano had called in from the stairwell. 2 of them lifted him without ceremony and took him out through the service entrance. Luciano stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then he went to the sink, washed his hands, and turned around. Simone's eyes were open. "How much of that did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," she said. Her voice was rough, papery with anesthetic, and pain. She looked at the syringe on the floor without moving. He was really going to do it. "Yes." Luciano brought her a cup of water, held the straw. She drank. "He's not going to do anything anymore." Oscar. Home. Guards on every door. He set the cup down and reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a folded piece of paper. On it, in Oscar's careful charcoal hand, was a drawing of a woman lying in a hospital bed, and beside the bed, a wolf, the same wolf from the sunroom floor, sitting guard. Simone stared at the drawing for a long time. "He did this tonight?" she asked. "Before I left the house, he came to find me in my office. He put the paper on my desk and pointed at the door. He wanted to make sure I was coming here." Luciano paused. He didn't speak, but he was very clear. She held the drawing against her chest with her good arm. The room was quiet. The city outside the window was that particular Vancouver dark, not fully black but deep grey-blue, the mountains invisible behind the cloud. Luciano sat in the chair beside the bed. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "You had time. You could have pushed him away and run." Simone was quiet for a moment. "He had his hand in mine," she said finally. "Oscar, the whole way across the room he was holding my hand. And when I saw the blade, I thought..." She stopped. "I thought not him. That was all, just not him." Luciano put his elbows on his knees. He pressed his hands together and looked at the floor. He was a man who had spent 2 decades building a life on the understanding that loyalty was always ultimately transactional. That love in particular was something you protected people from because it made you killable. "When you're well enough," he said, "you can go. I'll make arrangements for Thomas's care. Ongoing, whatever he needs." He paused. "You've earned more than I know how to calculate." Simone looked at him for a long time. "Is that the only offer?" she said. Luciano looked up. "Because I'm not leaving, Oscar." Her voice was quiet but very sure. "I'm not doing it." And she stopped, started again. "I'm not leaving you, either, if that's something you can hear right now." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the pressure in a room. "This life, you know what it is. I sewed up your ribs in a kitchen at 2 in the morning, she said. "I'm not confused about what it is." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was careful, like the first night he had put his hand on Oscar's shoulder, like he was holding something he wasn't sure he deserved to hold. "No more decisions I don't know about," she said. "No more carrying things alone." "No more," he agreed. He brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles, against the bandaging, against the evidence of what she had given freely, without being asked. 8 months later, the Ferrante estate looked different from the inside. Same iron gates, same guards, same tree line. But anyone who had known it before would have noticed. There was a wooden easel in the front hall where the security panel used to be. There were shoes by the back door, small ones, beside large ones, beside a pair of women's hiking boots worn down at the heel from trails up Cyprus. The kitchen smelled like something real. The guards smiled sometimes, which had previously not been in their professional vocabulary. On the second Saturday of October, Luciano and Simone were married in the garden overlooking the strait. It was not a large ceremony. The guests were the ones who had bled alongside them or owed them something worth more than money. Mrs. Pacini wore her good coat. The officiant kept it short. Oscar stood at his father's side as ring-bearer. He held the small wooden box with both hands and the concentrated seriousness of someone carrying something that matters. When the moment came, when Luciano bent to take the ring and caught his son's eye, Oscar looked up at Simone. And he spoke. Not loudly, but he spoke. "Don't go," he said. It was the first thing anyone had heard from him in almost 2 years, and it was not a question. It was a statement of fact, quiet and absolute, the way children say the things they mean most completely. Simone reached down and put her hand on his face. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I promised the wolf, remember?" Oscar looked at her for one more second. Then he turned back to face forward, still holding the box, in the posture of someone who has received a reliable answer and filed it away for good. Luciano put the ring on her finger. The mountains were in the distance. The tide was coming in off the strait, cold and grey and vast and entirely indifferent to the smallness of any one life, which was, Simone had learned, exactly the kind of world that made a single moment of choosing someone feel like the most consequential act a person could manage. She had arrived at that gate a woman who was exhausted and in debt, and quietly afraid of what the next month would bring. She had signed her name to a document she barely read because her brother needed medicine and the city was expensive and she had run out of other options. She hadn't been brave. She had been desperate, which sometimes looks the same from the outside. But somewhere between the kitchen floor and the gallery and the hospital room with the wolf drawing pressed against her chest, something had shifted under her, the way tectonic plates shift, slow and total, changing the whole shape of the ground. She had not saved a man. She had not fixed a family. She had just refused at a specific moment to step away from something that needed protecting. And in refusing, she had built the only home she'd ever really had.